The war had reached the gates of the Valari Empire. From the highest balcony of the Celestial Palace, Queen Lysara Vane stared into the endless night sky. Normally, the heavens above her capital world glittered with peaceful trade routes and civilian traffic. Now, distant flashes of light marked battles raging across nearby sectors. Another report had arrived only minutes earlier. Another colony lost, another fleet destroyed, another world abandoned to the Zarth Dominion. Lysara tightened her grip on the crystal railing. For generations, the Valari Empire had been one of the most powerful civilizations in known space. Their technology surpassed that of most species. Their fleets were legendary. Their scholars had unlocked secrets of science that others could barely imagine. None of it had stopped the Zarth. The insectoid invaders advanced relentlessly, consuming star systems one after another. Every victory only seemed to make them stronger. Behind her, the great doors opened. "Your Majesty," said Chancellor Vorik, "the High Council is assembled." Lysara turned and entered the council chamber. The room fell silent as she approached the central throne. Faces filled the circular hall: military commanders, governors, scientists, and nobles. Most looked exhausted. Some looked afraid. A massive holographic map hovered above the center of the room. Red markers covered nearly half of Valari territory. Commander Taurin stepped forward. "Our outer defenses have collapsed. At the current rate, the capital sector may be threatened within 6 months." Murmurs spread through the chamber. Lysara already knew the numbers. She had read every report personally. Still, hearing them spoken aloud made the reality harder to ignore. "What options remain?" she asked. Silence answered her. That silence frightened her more than any battle report. Finally, Chancellor Vorik cleared his throat. "There is one possibility." The room shifted uneasily. The unity bond. Several council members immediately began whispering. Lysara frowned. The unity bond was an ancient Valari tradition, rarely used and almost never discussed. In times of extreme crisis, the ruling house could form a sacred alliance with another civilization through a bonded partnership. The bond created political unity, military cooperation, and a limited emotional connection between the chosen pair. It had helped save the Empire centuries ago. "I know the tradition," Lysara said. "Which civilization has agreed?" Vorik hesitated. "Humanity." The chamber erupted. Some nobles protested instantly. Others laughed in disbelief. Lysara felt her stomach tighten. Humans? Of all possible allies, humanity was the last species she expected. They were newcomers to interstellar politics. Brave, certainly. Resourceful, perhaps. But many Valari considered them reckless and primitive. "You cannot be serious," Lysara said. "The calculations have already been completed," Vorik replied. "Ancient algorithms govern the unity bond. Once activated, they search for the most compatible candidate among allied civilizations. The selected individual has been confirmed." "Who?" Vorik looked down at his data tablet. "Sergeant Ethan Cross of Earth's Defense Coalition." The title alone caused more whispers. Not an ambassador, not a diplomat, a soldier. Lysara closed her eyes briefly. The fate of her empire now rested on an ancient tradition that had paired her with a human soldier. The situation felt absurd, yet the empire was running out of options. 3 days later, Ethan Cross arrived. The royal reception hall glittered with crystal pillars and floating lights. Hundreds of nobles gathered to witness the historic meeting. Lysara sat upon the throne, maintaining a calm expression. The great doors opened. A single human entered. He wore a dark military uniform with only a few decorations. He carried himself with confidence, but showed none of the arrogance Lysara expected. Instead of staring in wonder at the palace, he calmly approached the throne. When he stopped before her, he gave a respectful nod. "Your Majesty." Lysara studied him carefully. This was the human chosen by destiny. He looked ordinary. No royal blood, no political power, just a soldier. "You understand the significance of this arrangement?" she asked. "I do, and you accepted willingly?" Ethan met her gaze without hesitation. "My people need allies. If this bond helps save lives, then I'm honored to serve." His answer caught her off guard. There was no ambition in his voice, no desire for status, only sincerity. Hours later, the bonding ceremony began. Ancient energy flowed through the chamber as both participants stood within a circle of glowing symbols. Light surrounded them. For a brief moment, Lysara felt something impossible. A connection, not thoughts, not memories, emotions. She felt Ethan's determination, his loyalty, his courage, and beneath it all, an unwavering sense of duty. At the same instant, Ethan sensed something from her, the fear she hid from everyone, the crushing burden of an empire on the edge of collapse. The light faded. The ceremony ended. For several seconds, neither spoke, because for the first time, they had seen beyond appearances, and both had discovered that the other was not what they expected. The days following the unity bond were anything but peaceful. Although the ceremony had officially joined the Volari Empire and humanity as allies, it had done little to change the opinions of the royal court. If anything, the hostility toward Ethan Cross had grown. Every corridor of the Celestial Palace seemed filled with whispered comments whenever he passed. Just a human, a common soldier. The ancient bond has clearly malfunctioned. Ethan heard most of it. He ignored all of it. Years in the military had taught him that respect was earned through actions, not titles. Unfortunately, palace politics were far more complicated than battlefield tactics. One morning, Ethan stood beside Queen Lysara during a strategic briefing. A holographic map displayed the latest movements of the Zarth Dominion. Red icons spread steadily across Volari territory. The situation was worsening. Commander Tauren pointed toward a cluster of frontier systems. "We lost contact with 3 defense stations overnight." A heavy silence followed. The room's atmosphere felt different from any military command center Ethan had ever known. Nobody lacked intelligence. Nobody lacked courage. Yet fear had begun infecting every decision. The Volari leadership was fighting to preserve what remained instead of finding ways to win. As the meeting ended, nobles and officials filed from the chamber. One counselor lingered behind. "You should remember your place, human," he said quietly. Ethan raised an eyebrow. "My place? You are a symbolic partner. Nothing more. Military strategy is beyond your understanding." The counselor walked away before Ethan could answer. Across the room, Lysara had overheard the exchange. To her surprise, Ethan simply shrugged. The bond allowed her to sense a faint trace of his emotions. Not anger, not humiliation, amusement. That confused her. Most Volari nobles would have demanded satisfaction for such an insult. Ethan seemed completely unaffected. Later that evening, Lysara found him standing alone on one of the palace observation decks. Thousands of stars stretched across the darkness. "You do not seem bothered by the council," she said. Ethan glanced toward her. "Should I be? They openly disrespect you." He leaned against the railing. "Where I come from, respect isn't something people give you because of your title. It's something you earn." Lysara considered his words. The idea felt strangely foreign. Volari society had always been built upon rank and status. The bond briefly strengthened between them. For an instant, she sensed memories. Training exercises, long deployments, soldiers depending on one another regardless of social background. Humanity's view of leadership was very different from her own. Before she could ask more questions, alarms suddenly erupted throughout the palace. A piercing warning tone echoed through every corridor. Both turned immediately. "What was that?" Ethan asked. A security officer's voice crackled through nearby speakers. "Emergency alert. Intruders inside the council wing." The palace exploded into chaos. Guards rushed through hallways. Servants fled for cover. Without hesitation, Lysara began moving toward the council chamber. Ethan followed. They arrived moments later. The scene was already unfolding. Several armed figures had breached palace security. Energy blasts flashed across the room. Guards exchanged fire with attackers hidden behind overturned furniture. "Assassins," Lysara whispered. The realization hit instantly. This wasn't an attack on the palace. It was an attack on her. One of the attackers spotted the queen. A weapon swung toward her position. Everything happened in a fraction of a second. Before any guard could react, Ethan moved. He shoved Lysara sideways. The energy bolt struck his shoulder instead. Pain exploded across his body. The force sent him crashing against a wall. "Ethan!" Lysara shouted. Ignoring the injury, he pushed himself upright. The attacker fired again. This time, Ethan grabbed a fallen guard's weapon and returned fire. The room erupted into a close-quarters battle. Years of military training took over. Ethan advanced through the chamber with controlled precision. One attacker fell, then another. The remaining assassins attempted to retreat. Palace guards finally regained control and overwhelmed them. Minutes later, the fight was over. The surviving attackers were captured. The dead were removed. Smoke lingered in the air. Ethan sat against a damaged pillar while medics treated his wounded shoulder. Lysara approached him. "You were injured protecting me." He looked up. "It wasn't serious. You could have died." Ethan gave a small smile. Protecting people is part of the job. The simplicity of the answer stunned her. There had been no calculation, no political advantage, no attempt to gain favor. He had acted purely because someone needed protection. Through the bond, Lysara sensed his sincerity. For perhaps the first time since their meeting, a piece of her distrust began to fade. Then the chamber doors opened. Commander Taurin entered carrying a data tablet. His expression was grim. "Your Majesty." The room immediately grew quiet. "What is it?" Lysara asked. Taurin activated the display. The hologram showed dozens of enemy fleet signatures emerging along the Empire's outer sectors. More ships than anyone had expected. More than any previous invasion force. The Zarth had begun a full-scale offensive. Silence filled the room. Taurin's voice lowered. "Our analysts estimate they will reach the capital region within weeks." Lysara stared at the incoming enemy fleets. The final battle for her empire had begun, and for the first time, she found herself wondering not whether the human soldier belonged at her side, but whether he might be the reason her people survived. The news spread across the Valari Empire like a shockwave. The Zarth Dominion had launched its final offensive. System after system fell beneath the enemy advance. Massive fleets emerged from hyperspace, overwhelming planetary defenses with relentless precision. Entire colonies were evacuated as civilians fled toward the core worlds. For the first time in centuries, the Valari people feared extinction. Inside the Celestial Palace, emergency sessions of the High Council ran day and night. Every report seemed worse than the last. "We lost the Arkan sector. Defense Fleet 7 has been destroyed. Refugee transports are arriving beyond capacity." Queen Lysara listened to each update in silence. Weeks ago, she had tried to hide her fear from everyone around her. Now there was no point. Everyone could see the crisis. Even so, she refused to surrender. Neither, she noticed, did Ethan. The human soldier attended every briefing despite his injury. While many officials focused on what they had lost, Ethan kept asking a different question. What can we still use? At first, most Valari commanders dismissed him. But gradually, his observations became harder to ignore. He identified weaknesses in enemy movements. He suggested unconventional defensive tactics. Several of his recommendations saved entire evacuation fleets. The respect he had earned on the battlefield was slowly reaching the council chambers. Then came the message that changed everything. A communication officer rushed into the command center. Incoming transmission from Earth. The room immediately turned toward the central display. Moments later, the image of Commander Selene Ward appeared. Behind her stretched the bridge of a human warship. "Queen Lysara," she said. "The Earth Defense Coalition has approved full military support." Several council members exchanged surprised looks. Lysara leaned forward. "Full support." Selene nodded. "Our fleets are already en route." The display shifted. Hundreds of human vessels appeared on the tactical map. Then hundreds more, and more. A massive reinforcement force was crossing known space toward Valari territory. Even the council's military leaders looked stunned. One noble spoke before he could stop himself. "Why would humanity commit so many ships? The war is nearly lost." Selene's expression hardened. Because allies don't abandon each other. The transmission ended. Silence remained. For a moment, nobody spoke. Then Lysara felt something through the bond. Pride, not arrogance, not triumph. Simple pride in humanity's willingness to stand beside another civilization in its darkest hour. For the first time, she understood why Ethan carried himself the way he did. Humans weren't fearless. They simply chose not to run when others needed them. 3 days later, the combined fleets gathered above the capital world. The largest military force in Volari history now waited for battle. Yet Ethan believed defending the capital alone would fail. During the next strategy meeting, he stood before the holographic map. The Zarth expect us to protect every remaining world. A Volari admiral crossed his arms. Because that is our duty. Ethan nodded. And that's exactly why we're losing. The room erupted with protests. Before anyone could interrupt further, Ethan enlarged a distant section of space. A single location flashed red. Their command nexus. The chamber grew quieter. The command nexus coordinated communications across the entire Zarth invasion. Destroying it would cripple their ability to control fleets. It's heavily defended, one general argued. That's why they'll never expect us to attack it, Ethan replied. The debate lasted hours. Many commanders considered the plan suicidal. Finally, all eyes turned toward Lysara. The queen looked at the map, then at Ethan. Weeks ago, she would have dismissed the idea immediately. Now she remembered every moment since the bond. His honesty, his courage, his willingness to sacrifice himself for others. I support the operation, she said. The chamber fell silent. The decision was made. The attack began 48 hours later. Human and Volari warships jumped into enemy territory together. Space erupted into chaos. Missiles streaked across the darkness. Energy weapons lit entire sectors. Explosions blossomed like miniature stars. At the center of the assault, Ethan led a strike team toward the command nexus itself. Their mission was simple. Reach the core. Destroy it. End the war. The landing was brutal. Enemy resistance met them at every corridor. The Zarth fought with desperate determination. Several times the mission nearly failed. Yet the combined team continued advancing. Step by step, room by room. Finally, they reached the central reactor chamber. Towering machinery surrounded them. The command nexus pulsed with energy. A demolition charge could destroy everything. But there was a problem. A manual activation sequence was required. Someone would have to remain behind. The realization settled over the team. Nobody spoke. Everyone understood what it meant. Ethan studied the reactor controls. Then he quietly removed his helmet. I'll do it. One of the soldiers shook his head. There has to be another way. There isn't. Through the bond, Lysara suddenly felt a wave of calm determination from across the battlefield. Her eyes widened. She knew exactly where it was coming from. Ethan, he had made his choice. The realization struck her like a physical blow. The human she had once resisted was preparing to sacrifice himself for an empire that wasn't even his own. And for the first time, the thought of losing him filled her with fear. As alarms echoed through the command nexus, Ethan began preparing the final sequence. The fate of two civilizations now rested on a single decision, and time was running out. The reactor chamber trembled beneath Ethan's feet. Warning sirens echoed through the vast command nexus as red emergency lights flashed across metallic walls. The demolition charge had been armed. The countdown had begun. 7 minutes remained. Around him, the surviving members of the strike team hesitated. "Sergeant, we're not leaving you behind," one human marine said. Ethan shook his head. "You don't have a choice." The reactor's control system required constant manual synchronization until detonation. If he left the station, the sequence would fail and the command nexus would survive. Every sacrifice made to reach this point would mean nothing. "The mission comes first," Ethan said firmly. Reluctantly, the strike team began retreating toward the extraction point. Ethan watched them disappear into the corridor. Then he turned back toward the reactor. For the first time since the battle began, he was alone. Far away, Aboard the flagship Radiant Dawn, Queen Lysara suddenly stopped in the middle of her command deck. The bond. She could feel it. Not words. Not thoughts. Acceptance. Ethan had accepted his fate. A cold feeling spread through her chest. Weeks earlier, she had viewed him as an unwanted obligation forced upon her by ancient tradition. Now the thought of never seeing him again felt unbearable. Around her, officers continued monitoring the battle. Nobody noticed the struggle behind their queen's composed expression, except she was no longer struggling with a military decision. She was struggling with a personal one. The bond had begun with duty. Somewhere along the way, it had become trust, perhaps even friendship, and she was not willing to lose it. "Prepare my shuttle," Lysara ordered suddenly. The bridge officers stared in disbelief. "Your Majesty?" Commander Tauren asked. "I'm going to the Nexus." The command deck erupted with objections. "It's too dangerous. The battle isn't over. You are the queen." Lysara met their eyes. "And he is my partner." No one argued after that. Minutes later, her shuttle launched from the flagship and raced toward the damaged enemy station. Enemy fire filled space around them. Explosions rocked the hull. Still they pushed forward. Every second mattered. Inside the reactor chamber, Ethan checked the countdown. 3 minutes. The floor shook violently. The station was beginning to collapse. He allowed himself a small smile. Maybe this would be enough. Maybe humanity and the Volari would finally have a future. Then the chamber doors exploded open. Ethan spun around. His eyes widened. "Lysara." The queen entered with a squad of elite guards. "You are impossible to deal with," she said. For a moment, Ethan simply stared. "You shouldn't be here, and you shouldn't be trying to get yourself killed." Despite everything, Ethan laughed. The reaction surprised them both. The countdown reached 2 minutes. Reality quickly returned. "The reactor needs a manual connection," Ethan explained. "Someone has to stay." Lysara examined the control station. Then she noticed something. A secondary relay system hidden beneath damaged panels. "It doesn't." Ethan moved beside her. Together, they reviewed the readings. His eyes widened again. The battle damage had exposed an emergency override circuit. If properly connected, the reactor could remain synchronized without a person present. It was a possibility neither had seen earlier. A dangerous possibility, but possible. For the next 60 seconds they worked together. The station continued shaking around them. Alarms screamed. Metal structures collapsed overhead. Finally, the relay activated. Synchronization stable. The reactor no longer required a sacrifice. Ethan looked at the timer. 45 seconds. Time to leave. Nobody argued. The team sprinted through collapsing corridors toward the extraction shuttle. Behind them, the command nexus groaned as its systems failed. They barely reached the shuttle before launch. The pilot accelerated away from the station at maximum speed. 10 seconds. 9. 8. The damaged structure shrank behind them. 5. 4. 3. 2. 1. A blinding flash consumed the darkness. The command nexus vanished. A massive wave of energy swept across space. Throughout the battlefield, Zarth fleets suddenly lost coordination. Ships broke formation. Communications failed. Entire attack groups drifted into confusion. The heart of the invasion had been destroyed. The battle was over. Across dozens of star systems, Volari and human forces seized the opportunity. Within days, the Zarth offensive collapsed completely. Within weeks, surviving enemy fleets retreated beyond known space. For the first time in years, peace returned to the galaxy. Months later, sunlight bathed the towers of the Volari capital. The scars of war remained, but reconstruction had begun. Citizens filled the streets once more. Trade routes reopened. Children laughed in public parks. Life continued. On a palace balcony overlooking the city, Lysara stood beside Ethan. Neither wore armor. Neither carried weapons. For a while, they simply watched the peaceful world below. "It feels strange," Lysara said softly. "What is?" "Not receiving battle reports every morning." Ethan smiled. "I can understand that." Silence settled between them. Comfortable silence. the kind that only existed between people who trusted one another completely. Finally, Lysara looked toward him. When we first met, I wanted the bond dissolved. Ethan laughed. I noticed. A rare smile appeared on the Queen's face. I believe humans were reckless. We are reckless. She shook her head. No, you are brave. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Lysara extended her hand. Ethan accepted it. Below them, a peaceful civilization stretched toward the horizon. A future that had nearly been lost. A future saved because one human soldier refused to abandon those who needed him. And because one alien queen chose trust over fear. The unity bond had begun as a desperate alliance. It ended as something far stronger. A reminder that greatness is not measured by power, technology, or status. It is measured by the willingness to stand beside others when everything is at stake. And in the darkest hour of the Valari Empire, humanity had done exactly that. The alien queen had resisted a human bond with all her heart. In the end, it was that very human who helped give her people a future.